It began in silence, broken only by wind chimes and the soft ticking of a dismantled clock. The town of Dayton, Ohio, late spring 1943. No sirens, no gunfire, just rows of porches, the buzz of cicadas, and a backyard too cluttered for play. Near the fence line, half buried in weeds and dandelions, sat a tripod made from coat hangers and a sawed-off crutch. A copper pipe jutted skyward, capped by a polished lens salvaged from a broken projector. Duct tape held it all together, like stitches on a patient. Beside it knelt a boy, 12 years old, skinny, shirtless in the sun. His name was Billy Carver, and he was staring into the sky with a kind of furious stillness, brow furrowed, pencil in hand. He adjusted a mirror fragment by fractions of a degree, rechecked the sun angle, licked his finger, waited. Then, there it was, a flicker, a glint. His left eye twitched. He scribbled something in a spiral-bound notebook. 1302, eastward, fast, 1,000 feet. He bolted upright, dashed inside, and screamed at his father, "There's one coming in low, mark it!" His dad, half-shaven, stared blankly. "What are you yelling about?" Billy didn't wait for an answer. He was already back outside, tracking the sky, breath caught in his throat. 30 seconds later, a distant drone. Then the unmistakable outline of a P-39-era Cobra glided across the clouds. Low, fast, silent, until it was almost past. From a nearby base, radar hadn't seen it coming. But Billy had. This wasn't the first time, and it wouldn't be the last. Because what Billy had built in his backyard wasn't a toy. It wasn't even fully understood. Not by him, not by the adults around him. But it worked. With less than $2 of salvaged parts, he had created a rudimentary optical tracking system based on lens parallax, sun positioning, and his own obsessive sketching of flight patterns. It started as a game, a dare to spot the bird before the Army did. But now base staff were noticing. During drills, they began seeing his notes matched flight logs, down to the second. One officer laughed, called it a lucky streak. Another wasn't so sure. Because Billy's crude device could do something their radar couldn't. It could spot fast, low-altitude aircraft flying at angles radar failed to catch. The very trick the Luftwaffe was using to sneak past U.S. defenses in Europe. And Billy? He didn't know about Luftwaffe tactics or radar blind spots. He didn't care. He just knew that when he angled the lens at 36 degrees past 3 p.m. and toward the hill behind his neighbor's barn, he could catch the shimmer of an oncoming aircraft up to 11 seconds before it came into view. 11 seconds. In a dogfight, that's the difference between scrambling or dying. In air defense, that's the time you need to sound an alarm. But Billy had no alarm. No radar console, just a notebook, a bent pipe, and a head full of sky maps no one had taught him to draw. On that spring day, an officer finally showed up. Captain Winslow, square jaw, mirror shades, clipboard. He asked Billy to demonstrate the rig. Billy did. The officer said nothing. Just wrote a few notes, then left. But the next week, a training balloon lost from the base was located. On Billy's tip, a third time, then a fourth. It wasn't a fluke anymore. Something built from junk was outperforming wartime tech, and a 12-year-old was outspotting the U.S. Air Corps. Not with access, not with funding, just with curiosity, and a lens no one else thought to tilt. In every war, innovation is lionized, so long as it comes from the right people. Scientists in crisp lab coats, engineers in top-secret labs, officers with clearances and budgets. The idea that a child barefoot in a backyard could outthink a military research team wasn't just improbable. It was offensive, because the U.S. war machine ran on hierarchy. Intelligence had to be vetted, data had to be confirmed, analyzed, and routed through official channels. A good idea didn't matter if it came from the wrong rank, and a 12-year-old didn't even register on the scale. Billy Carver's lens rig wasn't just dismissed, It was invisible. When he first sent letters to the local airfield describing his invention, they were routed to public affairs and marked as community morale. His diagrams, hand-drawn in colored pencil and annotated with meticulous flight angle estimates, were returned with a polite, "Thank you for your patriotism." To the military, he was just another kid waving flags and collecting scrap metal for ration drives. But behind the scenes, something was shifting. Because war doesn't care about credentials. It cares about results. And Billy was producing them. The misconception that innovation must be professional, academic, or institutionally sanctioned had deep roots. WW2 was, after all, the era of massive government programs. The Manhattan Project, MIT's Radiation Lab, Bell Lab's Communication Research. These weren't places for children. They were fortress labs, sealed by funding and hierarchy. But Billy didn't need a lab. He had lenses, shards from old movie projectors, refracted through layers of copper tubing guided by instinct, not equations. His system didn't look like science. It looked like madness. That's why it worked. He wasn't solving the problem the military thought they had. He was solving the one they didn't know they'd overlooked. While radar techs obsessed over upward sweep angles and electromagnetic reflection zones, Billy noticed something else. Glint, the flash of a canopy, the bounce of sunlight off aluminum wings. These weren't electronic signals, they were visual patterns. But they occurred before sound or radar return, if you knew where to look. And Billy always knew. So why didn't they listen? Because the system wasn't built to listen to him. Even when Captain Winslow submitted his field report about a civilian's optical spotting rig with anomalous results, it was buried under 3 layers of paperwork. Civilian involvement wasn't a priority unless it involved sabotage or industrial labor. The idea that a boy with no training could improve Allied detection capability was unthinkable. Until the math made it undeniable. Over 7 recorded drills, Billy's scope beat the base's early warning radar in 5. In 2 others, they tied. Each time, officers dismissed it as coincidence. But one logistics clerk kept track. Her name was Maureen Heller, and she began logging Billy's call-outs on her own. She wasn't a scientist, just observant. And in May 1943, she submitted a memo with 17 timestamps. Billy's detections averaged 7.2 seconds faster than radar, and 0 false positives. Still, the report went nowhere. Not because it was flawed, but because it was unorthodox. This was the core misconception, that innovation must be top-down, must be clean, must come with credentials. But in war, sometimes the mind farthest from the front lines sees clearest. Billy's lens didn't look like a weapon. It didn't beep or blink or print out coordinates. It just let you see faster, earlier, better. And that was enough to change everything. By 1943, Allied radar was supposed to be the technological shield against aerial surprise. After Pearl Harbor, billions were poured into signal detection, early warning networks, and real-time tracking. From the chain home towers in Britain to SCR-270 units in the U.S., the Allies believed they were building an impenetrable dome over their skies. They weren't. Radar, though revolutionary, had a flaw, one so subtle it took years to admit. It couldn't see beneath itself. Technically, the issue was known as the ground clutter gap. Radar beams, angled upward to catch high-altitude bombers, couldn't distinguish aircraft flying low and fast over terrain. Anything moving beneath the radar's beam width was lost in the noise. Trees, hills, and buildings scattered the signal, hiding aircraft that skimmed just above rooftops. And the Germans figured it out. Luftwaffe pilots, particularly in their Me-109s and Focke-Wulf 190s, began experimenting with low-altitude recon and strike runs. By hugging the terrain, they evaded detection until the last possible second, sometimes not at all. Reports came in from Britain, then France, then coastal U.S. outposts, planes appearing without warning, sirens sounding too late, even stateside. During training exercises and mock drills, American radar operators began noticing inconsistencies. In multiple scenarios, friendly aircraft assigned to simulate enemy approaches succeeded in striking ground targets without being detected until they were nearly overhead. It was no longer theoretical. A real radar blind spot existed, between 0 and roughly 2,500 feet. Depending on geography, time of day, and weather, that gap could extend for miles. Military engineers responded with more funding. New systems were proposed: low-angle radar towers, forward scatter systems, improved vertical beam range. But implementation lagged behind theory. Costs soared. Meanwhile, the German planes kept coming. Into this chaos walked Billy Carver, though he didn't know it. What he was building in his backyard, his sun glint tracker, as he called it, wasn't designed to solve the radar problem. Billy didn't even know what radar was. He was solving a different problem: how to see a plane before he could hear it. He loved watching aircraft, but he hated being startled. So he began tracking the way light bounced off canopies, engines, wings. He noticed a pattern: how the sun revealed a plane long before its sound reached the ground. He wasn't reading books. He was staring at clouds. But his intuition aligned with something even top scientists were missing: a time gap between visibility and radar signature. When radar missed low-flying objects, Billy's rig picked them up, visually, by tracing glints and shadows the moment they crested a hill or banked into sunlight. In essence, he built an early warning optical detector that worked within the radar gap. And he wasn't alone in struggling with the problem. U.S. bases across the eastern seaboard were quietly logging more undetected flyovers. Training exercises were being revised. Alarm systems were failing. And civilian observers, once mocked for being too slow or untrained, were outperforming military stations simply by using binoculars and intuition. The military hated it. To admit the radar gap existed was to admit vulnerability. So instead, they buried it under more layers of classification, while investing millions in more complex systems that wouldn't arrive in time to fix the real problem. Meanwhile, in a small backyard in Ohio, a 12-year-old was unknowingly patching a flaw in one of the most expensive defense systems ever built. All he needed was a few broken lenses, a copper pipe, and a gut feeling that the sun could see better than the machines. By mid-1943, the statistics no longer whispered. They screamed. Out of 317 recorded low-altitude approach drills conducted across U.S. and U.K. airspace, 11% of mock aircraft penetrated radar defenses without detection. That number climbed to 17% in coastal zones with high terrain, like Maine, Cornwall, or Normandy. Worse, in the event of radar detection, the average time to alert delay was 12.4 seconds, a lifetime for a pilot, and an eternity for anti-air crews expecting 5-second warning windows. In simulated enemy raids using gliders or P-39s flying below 2,000 feet, nearly 1 in 5 aircraft were able to simulate bomb drops without being tracked. These weren't wartime exaggerations. They were internal evaluations from Fort Belvoir, Wright Field, and RAF Bentley Priory. But the most damning number came from Ohio: 7.3 seconds. That was Billy Carver's average reaction time. 17 events logged, 15 confirmed, 0 false positives, no radar, no power, no encryption. Just a kid with a magnifier rig and a notebook. Military brass shrugged. Coincidence, they said. The boy's just lucky. But the math didn't care. Billy's system had an 87% detection rate within 10 seconds, compared to radar's 61% for aircraft flying below 2,000 feet. He also recorded 2 detections of aircraft that radar never saw, which were only later confirmed by base logs as non-hostile friendly flyovers. His biggest advantage? No electronic delay. Radar systems processed signals, filtered returns, mapped signatures. That took time. Billy just used his eyes, and his rig, a Frankenstein contraption of mirrors and focal lenses, aligned along a calibrated arc, worked because it wasn't trying to bounce signals. It simply captured sunlight glints at angles radar ignored. During one informal test, base officers ran a simulated flyover using a Piper Cub at 200 feet. Billy spotted it at 9.6 seconds. Radar picked it up at 13.4. He didn't even know it was a test. The officer logged it, then shredded the page. Because here's the truth, no one wanted printed. The best early warning device in Dayton was being operated by a 12-year-old. Billy's notes were filled with crude diagrams, sun angles, shadow estimates. Not just guesses, correlated, repeatable calculations. He couldn't write equations, but he didn't need to. His lens picked up what machines missed. Why didn't the military just adopt it? Because numbers don't always beat egos. Billy's work was too simple, too messy, too human. It didn't come from Bell Labs or Harvard. It came from a boy who couldn't spell aeronautics. But if someone had asked a different question, not "where's your degree," but "what does the data say?" they might have realized that the answer to one of WW2's greatest detection gaps was sitting in a backyard, spinning copper tubing, and watching the sky with the quiet patience of someone who'd already solved the problem. It started as a drill, nothing more. Just a routine launch of a high-altitude weather balloon from the training yard at Wright-Patterson Field. Standard practice for wind tracking and upper atmosphere readings. Officers logged the liftoff at 3:06 p.m. Wind heading northeast. Balloon type: 2.1 meter standard latex with reflective aluminum core. What wasn't standard was that the balloon disappeared. 17 minutes into the flight, it veered off course, its radio tracker failed, and its signal was lost above the southern edge of Dayton. Base crews scanned the sky. Spotters with binoculars reported nothing. Radar, blank. The assumption was clear. Burst or detachment, but not for Billy Carver. At exactly 3:26 p.m., from a folding lawn chair beside his makeshift tripod, Billy logged a flicker in his rig. Just a glint, a flash of light bending around a drifting point above the tree line. He adjusted a cracked lens fragment, traced a path using his chalk-marked azimuth circle, and made a mark. Then he picked up the phone. When base personnel answered, they got the usual. "It's Billy. I spotted something." They rolled their eyes, this kid again. But 12 minutes later, when an auxiliary jeep followed his crude map coordinates along the edge of a hayfield west of the city, they saw it, floating, untethered, perfectly intact. The balloon. Billy had found it, before radar, before optics, before telemetry. And it wasn't the first time. Over the past month, Billy had begun calling in random sightings, charting aircraft paths, sometimes matching them to active base logs. Most were dismissed. A few caught attention. But this was different. This time, the object in question was something the military itself had lost. A tech sergeant recorded the time of recovery, 3:38 p.m. Billy's detection was time-stamped at 3:26, 12 minutes ahead of search teams, 17 minutes ahead of radar. When the officers came to his house that evening, they didn't laugh. They didn't talk down. They asked questions. How did you know where it was? How did you track the movement? What kind of system is this? Billy didn't have blueprints. He had a notebook, a diagram sketched in red and black crayon, mirrors held with twine, calculations based on shadows, angles of deflection. "This one bounces the sun at 27 degrees, he explained, pointing at a shard of projector lens taped to a coat hanger. "That's how I saw the flash." He called it glint mapping. They called it impossible. But it worked. To verify, base staff ran a silent trial 2 days later. Another balloon, unmarked, launched without notice. This time they didn't tell Billy, just let it drift. And again, he caught it. This time in 9.8 seconds. Logged, tracked, reported, confirmed. No radar return. Billy was now a problem. A 12-year-old with no clearance, no authority, and no reason to outperform $3 million worth of equipment, but doing it anyway. One officer privately wrote, "We've got a ghost radar in the suburbs, and it's a kid with a telescope." But the irony? It wasn't even a telescope. It was a hacked-together sun catcher, mounted to a busted crutch and stabilized by fishing weights. Ugly, primitive, uncoded, But in the chaos of war, when tools mattered more than titles, it was brutally effective. That balloon incident marked a shift. Billy was no longer dismissed, not yet accepted, but no longer ignored. The military had a new question. If a 12-year-old could find what radar couldn't, what else was being missed? T wasn't a headline. It wasn't even written down in any official log. But inside the officers' briefing room at Wright-Patterson, it was quietly acknowledged. For 3 full seconds, U.S. radar had been obsolete. And it was because of a boy, barefoot, undersized, unpaid, who tracked moving targets with nothing more than sunlight and timing. The data came from a calibration test held on June 19, 1943. A pair of AT-6 Texan trainers was ordered to simulate a low-altitude enemy pass along a curved riverbank just west of Dayton. They would fly under 2,800 feet, mask their signature using topography, and see how long it took base radar to detect them. Unbeknownst to most of the officers, Billy Carver had been tipped off by a sympathetic tech sergeant. He set up early, adjusted for glare, checked wind patterns. At 2:14 p.m., both AT-6s passed into the valley corridor. Billy's lens rig flared. He scribbled the time in his notebook. 14:14:22. Radar pinged the planes at 14:14:25. 3 seconds. 3 seconds ahead of the most advanced detection system in the region. 3 seconds that would decide everything in a real attack. Enough time to scramble interceptors. Enough time to trigger an alert. Enough time to save a city block from being vaporized. For Billy, it was another data point. For the Air Corps, it was a red flag. Because the longer they tested him, the more the numbers worked in his favor. By the end of June, he had been secretly integrated into 8 field exercises. In 6 of them, he beat radar. In 2, they tied. In 0, did radar beat him outright? That was the math. But it wasn't just about speed, it was about cost. The base's radar installation had required over $300,000 in construction and operation. Power consumption, technician salaries, maintenance, encryption systems. Billy's lens? It ran on sunshine and instinct. The price tag, $473 in scrap parts. Collapse math. When a boy with a notebook and a shoebox rig could outperform an entire radar installation, even if just for 3 seconds, it shook the foundation of military trust in their own technology. But they didn't upgrade Billy. They didn't bring him in. They didn't re-engineer his system. They did what all large organizations do when faced with inconvenient excellence. They buried it. His tracking rig was quietly disassembled after the summer. His drawings vanished from the bulletin board. The tech sergeant who had helped him was reassigned, and the calibration logs that showed his 3-second victory, misfiled, then lost. What couldn't be erased was the truth. That for a brief moment during one drill in 1943, the future of aerial defense didn't rest on a radar tower. It rested in the hands of a 12-year-old who just knew how to look up at the sky in the right way. July 2nd, 1943. 4:03 p.m. A B-25 Mitchell bomber, call sign Redbird 7, was en route to Wright-Patterson Field from a classified test range in Missouri. The flight was supposed to be uneventful, a routine equipment transfer flight flown low and quiet to simulate evasive bombing paths. But something went wrong with the radio signal as it approached Dayton. The aircraft entered the defense zone with no ID, no transponder ping, and no prior clearance. It was invisible. To radar crews, there was nothing, no blip, no pulse, no warning. The bomber flew low just under 1,900 feet, using the hills west of the river as cover. It was simulating a hostile pass, but in real time, it looked like an unidentified incursion. Standard procedure was to wait for confirmation from adjacent fields or visual spotting. None came. Until Billy saw it. At exactly 4:03:52, his lens rig flared again. The afternoon sun had dipped just enough to catch the top curve of the Mitchell's cockpit. Billy recorded the glint, tracked its arc, estimated speed, and placed a red pin on his map board, an area 6.2 miles south of the base. He ran to the emergency line and delivered the message to the airfield desk. "Big one, coming in low, south of the ridge." The operator paused, confused. "What type of aircraft?" "Big tail, two-engine," Billy said. "It's skimming just over the treetops." They had no record of any incoming bomber. The desk officer alerted base command anyway. At 4:04:27, spotters were redirected to Billy's coordinates. At 4:05:14, they visually confirmed the aircraft. It had already passed over half the base perimeter. That meant Billy's alert had given them nearly 90 seconds of lead time, while radar still showed nothing. When Redbird 7 finally landed and the confusion cleared, it was discovered that the pilot had misunderstood his orders and switched off his transponder prematurely. He had simulated a stealth run so well that he'd nearly been intercepted. But no one could explain how Billy knew. The event was quietly referred to as the Ghost Bird Incident. It became legend inside the base, especially among junior officers who admired Billy's knack. A kid with no clearance had saved a base from a friendly fire catastrophe. In a real war zone, that bomber might have been a Junkers 88, flying in under radar, hunting fuel depots. And without Billy's detection, no one would have known until it was too late. The irony? Billy didn't think it was a big deal. He never claimed heroism. He didn't even celebrate. He just made another entry in his notebook. July 2nd. Bright shine on wingtip, about 600 feet elevation, southward, fast. Then he went back to sketching the sky. The adults scrambled to explain it. Some said luck, others guessed radio interference. But one intelligence officer wrote a private memo. "We may be underestimating the potential of real-time visual triangulation with sun-angle optics." Translation: Billy's rig was legit. But it was too embarrassing to admit a child had done what their entire system hadn't. So, once again, the data was absorbed quietly, folded into classified performance reviews. The bomber incident was chalked up to miscommunication and filed away. But the detection timing remained. 4:03:52. The moment one boy's junk lens caught what $6 million in military detection tech could not. It was the 4th of July. Fireworks were booming over the town. Music drifted up from the county fairground. Most of Wright-Patterson was on low alert. Bare-bones duty rotations, skeleton radar crews, and a full assumption of peacetime security. Nothing ever happened on holidays. But Billy Carver never took holidays off. Even in the fading light, he kept his lens rig running. He'd added a new piece, a larger mirror from a broken wall sconce, now duct-taped to a panhead mount, giving him better lateral tracking. He was hoping to spot a twilight glimmer off one of the flyovers rumored to be part of the Independence Day celebrations. At 9:46 p.m., he saw something he didn't expect. Not a glint, a shimmer, low, steady. It moved east to west just above the horizon line, flying at a suspiciously even altitude. Not arcing like a celebration flyover, not turning like a search pattern. It wasn't blinking like a civilian aircraft. No light signatures, no noise. Billy blinked, then adjusted his scope. The shimmer was still there. It was moving too fast for a balloon, too slow for a jet. It didn't fit anything he'd seen. He ran to the phone and called the base. "Unidentified glimmer, heading west, low angle. Could be a low-altitude scout. No lights." The operator barely responded. "You sure it's not fireworks, Billy?" "It's not fireworks. Maybe a bird, caught in a spark trail? I've tracked birds, this isn't one." But it was the 4th of July. And the operator, half listening, half laughing, wrote "possible false alarm" in the log. Billy hung up and kept watching. The shimmer vanished behind a line of trees, then reappeared moments later, curving upward, gaining altitude. That's when he realized it was using thermal updrafts, riding the heat of the day's last sun patches, cloaking itself in the visual chaos of a holiday night. That wasn't random, that was smart. Billy called again. This time he didn't ask, he told. Something's wrong. Scramble a visual team. Again, no action. So Billy did what only Billy would do. He biked to the base. In under 4 minutes, he was at the gate, sweaty, breathless, furious. He flagged down a sergeant he knew, one of the few who still trusted his instincts. "What did you see?" the man asked. Billy pointed to the sky. "Fast, dark, no lights. Low pass, then climb. Not one of ours." The sergeant hesitated, then made a call. 10 minutes later, a spotter plane was in the air. They didn't find anything. But an hour later, the call came in from a fuel depot 30 miles west. Local guards had spotted a low-flying aircraft, unmarked, no lights, buzzing the outer perimeter before veering north. No radar detection, no flight plan. No friendly flyover logged. Whoever it was, they were never found. The report was buried, filed under training deviation. But internally, an officer admitted the timeline matched Billy's sighting. The shimmer, the turn, the vanishing. He'd seen it coming. Once again, before anyone else. This time, though, there were consequences. A reprimand was issued to the radar team. An internal audit was launched. And Billy? He was quietly blacklisted for making further calls to the main operations line. They'd rather silence the system than acknowledge the flaw. Still, the numbers didn't lie. Billy's alert had come at 9:46 p.m. The depot sighting was logged at 10:11 p.m. That meant he had detected a likely hostile pass 25 minutes before any official response. And he'd done it at night, with a hacked-together mirror rig and a gut feeling about light angles. No radar ever would have seen it. Billy knew that. The military knew that. But the world wasn't ready for optics over electronics, not from a 12-year-old. So they let the moment pass. But history remembers the timing. 9:46. One boy, one lens, one invisible plane no one believed, until it was nearly too late. Billy Carver didn't disappear, he just faded, quietly, like the shimmer of a plane vanishing behind the sun. After the July incidents, after outspotting radar in 3 separate documented cases, the military didn't celebrate him. They erased him. His tracking rig was quietly disassembled for safety. His observation privileges were revoked. Even the sergeant who once supported him stopped returning his calls. And at 12 years old, Billy was told that he had done enough and should focus on school. There was no medal, no recognition, no post in operations. The official verdict was that his results were statistically intriguing but operationally inconsistent. Unofficially, his data had terrified them. Because if Billy's sun glint system could outperform radar, even in a few cases, it raised a nightmare question. What if all this tech isn't enough? What if the millions spent on towers, tubes and dials could be outdone by a boy with some mirrors and a chalkboard? It wasn't just embarrassing. It was dangerous. Defense contractors, radar officers, air base commanders, they all had a stake in the myth that radar was the eye of God, infallible, all-seeing. Billy's lens said otherwise, so they shut it down. But what they couldn't destroy was the idea. Billy kept tinkering. He drew newer models in the margins of his notebooks. He mapped solar angles during storms. He even built a night rig, trying to capture moon reflections with a series of calibrated prisms scavenged from broken binoculars. No one cared. And yet, years later, when DARPA began experimenting with passive optical tracking for stealth detection, their research echoed Billy's notes almost verbatim, tracking light phase shifts, using terrain shadow angles, and glint timing. He wasn't just early. He was right. But he wasn't military. He wasn't licensed. He was just a boy. In the years after the war, Billy became a technician, worked in electronics, never built a radar, never filed a patent. But those who knew him said he always carried a small notebook, always looked at the sky like it was whispering secrets. Because maybe it was. And maybe Billy had learned something no radar ever could. The sky has a language. You just have to watch the light. That's what his lens really was, a decoder ring for sunlight, a way to read the sky before it spoke in sound or signal. It wasn't perfect, but neither was radar. And in the 1940s, when seconds meant survival, a glint of light could change everything. He proved that. And for a few brilliant weeks in the summer of 1943, a backyard rig made from junk and genius outpaced the best machines in the world. The system was crude, the boy was real, and the legend, unmistakable. If you stand in a field just west of Dayton on a clear afternoon, and the sun hits at just the right angle, you might still catch it. A faint flicker in the grass, the glint of something once forgotten. Maybe it's a broken lens. Maybe it's nothing. Or maybe, just maybe, it's a trace of Billy Carver's rig, the one the Air Force didn't want anyone to remember. Because the truth is, the best battlefield inventions aren't always born in labs. Sometimes they come from junk drawers and backyard fences. Sometimes they come from kids who haven't been told something is impossible yet. Billy didn't have clearance, he didn't need it. He had curiosity, sunlight, and a notebook. And in a world drowning in signals, he taught us something devastatingly simple. Sometimes the eye sees what the machine misses. If you were captivated by this story, by the hidden genius of a 12-year-old who outsaw radar, there's more coming. So subscribe, stay tuned, and remember, history doesn't always belong to generals. Sometimes it belongs to a kid with a mirror.